frozen in the dark and the gloom.
The night before a Viking raid, nobody was sharpening swords around a campfire singing war songs. That's the version Hollywood invented. The real version was more interesting, more disciplined, and honestly more terrifying. Because what made Viking raids so devastating wasn't just the fighting. It was everything that happened in the 24 hours before the first man stepped off the boat. Most people think Viking success came down to violence and fearlessness. It didn't. It came down to preparation. Systematic, obsessive, generational preparation that turned a raid from a gamble into a calculated operation. These were not disorganized barbarians who got lucky. These were professionals who had refined every single step of their process over decades until the margin for error was almost zero. Tonight, we're going through exactly what that preparation looked like. The intelligence gathering that happened weeks before the raid. The ship checks that determined whether everyone came home. The weapon preparation that went far beyond sharpening a blade. The mental and spiritual rituals that put warriors in the right state of mind. The food and physical preparation that made bodies ready for extreme violence. And the command decisions made in the final hours that determined the entire shape of the attack. 7 stages. One of the most effective pre-combat preparation systems in medieval history. Let's get into it. Stage 1. By the time a Viking raiding party was sitting on a beach the night before an attack, the intelligence work had already been done weeks or months earlier. And without it, nothing else mattered. Viking raids were not random. The image of longships appearing suddenly from nowhere and attacking whatever coastline happened to be nearby is almost entirely wrong. Every significant raid targeted a specific location that had been researched, assessed, and selected through a deliberate intelligence process that would be recognizable to any modern military planner. The primary intelligence sources were merchants. Viking society was as much about trade as raiding, and Norse merchants traveled the same coastlines, rivers, and ports that raiders later targeted. A merchant who spent 3 days trading at a monastery's harbor came back with information about the depth of the water, the number of monks, the location of the valuables, the distance to the nearest armed settlement, and how quickly any response force could realistically arrive. This wasn't accidental. It was systematic. Merchants were intelligence assets who happened to also sell goods. Captured individuals from previous raids were another critical source. People taken as slaves or hostages during earlier operations were questioned about geography, defenses, seasonal patterns, and local politics. Where were valuables stored? When were the guards weakest? Which local lord would respond and how fast? What time of year did the monastery have the most silver? Coastal geography was studied before any commitment was made. Landing beaches had to meet specific criteria. Shallow enough for a longship to beach directly. Firm enough that men in armor could move quickly off it. Hidden enough from main settlements that a landing at dawn gave time to move before alarm was raised. Close enough to the target that the approach could be completed before defenders organized. Viking leaders who chose bad landing beaches got people killed. The ones who survived long enough to lead multiple raids chose very carefully. Tidal patterns, river depths, and seasonal weather on the target coastline were factored into timing. Attacking a river monastery required knowing when water levels allowed longship passage. Attacking a coastal settlement required knowing which winds and tides allowed rapid departure after the raid. The preparation happened before anyone left home. By the night before the attack, the target was already thoroughly understood. They were doing reconnaissance and intelligence assessment for medieval military operations. We just called it trading and asking questions. Stage 2. The night before, a raid began with the ship. A Viking longship was the most sophisticated piece of technology in the Norse world. It was also the only way home. Every man in the raiding party understood that if the ship was damaged, lost, or destroyed, the chance of getting home alive dropped to near zero. So the final ship inspection the night before a raid was not a formality. It was survival. Hull integrity was checked plank by plank in the sections most exposed to stress. Longships used a construction technique called clinker building, overlapping planks fastened with iron rivets and sealed with wool or animal hair soaked in pine tar. The seams between planks were the vulnerability. Salt water, heavy loading, and the stress of ocean crossing dried out the fibers and opened gaps. A missed gap meant water ingress during the return journey under heavy load with exhausted crew. Crew members went over the hull in sections, pressing seams, checking rivets, recalking anything that showed movement. The rigging was inspected under tension where possible. Ropes stretched and weakened. A stay that held during the outward journey under normal sailing conditions might fail under the shock loading of a fast departure in difficult weather with a full crew rowing hard. Every line was checked, frayed sections replaced, knots retied. Oar condition mattered more than most people realize. A longship under oar power in a fast river current or against a headwind required every oar working. A broken oar at the wrong moment cost speed, cost distance, cost lives if pursuit was close. Spare oars were carried, but checking that existing oars were sound and uncracked was part of the evening's work. The shallow draft that made Viking longships revolutionary, allowing them to beach directly and navigate rivers other vessels couldn't enter, also made them sensitive to loading balance. Cargo from the raid would be loaded fast under pressure. The ship had to be positioned and balanced beforehand so that rapid loading didn't compromise stability. The stowage plan for expected loot was worked out before the raid, not after. They treated their ship the way a modern special operations unit treats its vehicles before a mission. Because the mission isn't over when the fighting stops. It's over when you're home. And that requires the ship to work perfectly when you need it most. Stage 3. Weapons preparation. The night before a raid was a precise technical process that went far beyond what most people imagine. Swords were checked for edge integrity along the entire length of the blade, not just the cutting section. A nick or deformation in the wrong place created a stress point that could cause the blade to fail under lateral force during combat. Failed blades killed their owners. Each chip was worked out with a whetstone, and the edge restored to a consistent profile. The final edge was raised with progressively finer stones until the blade would shave hair cleanly. Anything less was not acceptable. Axes received the same attention. Viking axes had two critical zones: the beard, the lower forward extension of the blade, and the top edge. Both had to be sharp, and both had to be set at the right geometry on the handle. A loose axe head was not just ineffective. It was dangerous to the person swinging it. Every head was checked for play in the socket, tightened with wooden wedges if needed, and the binding inspected. Shields were frequently underestimated in their technical requirements. A Viking round shield was a composite construction, a wooden board of specific thickness, a central iron boss, leather facing, and a rim binding. Any of these components failing in combat had immediate consequences. Boards that had dried and cracked were replaced. Rim bindings that had loosened were reattached. The iron boss was checked for tightness because a boss that shifted under impact changed the grip geometry and interfered with the blocking technique built on years of practice. Spear shafts were inspected for straightness and wood integrity. A spear thrown with a warped shaft went wide. A spear shaft with a crack failed on impact and left the thrower without a weapon at a critical moment. Shafts were rolled on flat ground to check trueness, and any with visible defects were replaced from spares carried for exactly this purpose. Helmets were checked for fit and structural integrity. A helmet that shifted during combat blocked vision at the worst possible moment. A cracked helmet provided less protection than the wearer believed they had. Fit was adjusted with padding added or removed. Personal armor. Mail shirts where present, layered leather where mail wasn't available, was inspected for broken links or stitching failures. A gap in mail in the wrong location was a wound waiting to happen. This process took hours. It was not rushed. Warriors who rushed their weapon checks before raids were warriors who discovered problems at the worst possible time. Stage 4. Viking raids were not secular operations. They were conducted within a religious and spiritual framework that shaped the mental preparation of every man involved. And the night before an attack was when that preparation was most deliberately applied. Odin was the primary deity of warriors and battle, and invocation of Odin before combat was standard practice for raiding parties. This wasn't casual prayer. It was a formal ritual conducted by the leader or a designated person with the right knowledge, calling on Odin's favor for the specific operation, asking for his ravens, Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, to fly ahead and scout the path. Thor's protection was sought for the crossing and the physical endurance of the journey. Thor was the god of strength, storms, and the common warrior, and his hammer symbol appeared on pendants worn by most fighters specifically for protection in dangerous situations. Sacrifice had typically already occurred before departure from home. Live animals, sometimes more significant offerings, given to ask divine favor for the entire expedition. By the night before the attack, what remained was personal ritual. Individual warriors making their own prayers, touching their amulets, going through personal sequences of preparation that connected them to their beliefs at the moment of maximum need. The Norse belief system did not promise warriors that they would survive. It promised that how they fought and how they died mattered. Valhalla was not guaranteed to everyone. It was reserved for those who died with weapons in hand, fighting without cowardice. This belief system removed the psychological burden of survivability as a measure of success. The question was not whether you would survive. The question was whether you would fight in a way that deserved remembrance. That reframing of the stakes produced a particular kind of combatant that enemies found extremely difficult to deal with. Experienced leaders used the spiritual preparation period deliberately to shape group psychology. Stories of previous successful raids were retold. The courage of dead companions was honored. The reputation of the target was discussed in ways that motivated rather than intimidated. By the time the night was done, every man should be psychologically positioned to move forward without hesitation when the moment came. They understood that the body goes where the mind has already gone. The spiritual preparation was psychological preparation conducted in a language everyone understood. Stage 5. The body needed as much preparation as the weapons and the mind. Physical readiness the night before a raid followed a specific logic that modern sports science and military preparation would recognize completely. Food timing was managed deliberately. A large meal was consumed in the early evening, not immediately before sleep, and not skipped. The reasoning was physiological. Digestion generates body heat and provides the metabolic substrate for sustained physical output. Warriors who went into a morning raid fasted were running on depleted glycogen by the time fighting became intense. Warriors who ate heavily immediately before sleep or before the raid itself had blood diverted to digestion at exactly the moment they needed it in their muscles. Early evening eating was the correct timing. and it was applied consistently. The meal itself was high in protein and fat rather than primarily carbohydrate. Dried meat, stockfish, hard cheese, and rendered fat provided slow-release energy that lasted through a dawn departure and the physical demands of the raid itself. This was not nutritional science. It was accumulated practical knowledge that the foods which made warriors feel strong and sustained during raids were the ones they ate before raids. Sleep was taken seriously as a performance variable, not just a comfort. Leaders enforced rest in the final hours before departure. A warrior who had been awake all night through excitement, nerves, or poor discipline was slower, made worse decisions under pressure, and fatigued faster in sustained fighting. The goal was a specific number of hours of actual sleep before the pre-dawn departure, and leaders managed this actively. Hydration was handled carefully, given the limitations of available water. Mead and ale were the normal Viking beverages, but heavy alcohol consumption the night before a raid was controlled or prohibited by functional leaders. The reason was practical. Dehydrated and alcohol-impaired warriors were liabilities in the coordination and rapid movement that successful raids required. Some ritual drinking occurred as part of the spiritual preparation. Significant drinking was for the celebration after return. Physical warm-up before departure was brief but deliberate. Cold muscles in cold weather didn't perform at their best from a standing start. Light movement, joint mobilization, and low-intensity activity in the final minutes before boarding got blood moving and prepared the body for the transition from rest to maximum output. They were managing athletic performance before athletic performance was a field of study, because the alternative was dying tired. Stage 6. In the final hours before departure, the raid leader made a series of command decisions that determined the entire shape of the attack. These decisions were made in the dark, often in silence, and they had to be right. Force allocation was assigned specifically. Who went first off the ship? Who held the ship against the beach? Who took the perimeter? Who focused on the primary target? Who managed any captives? In a coordinated raid on a defended location, every man had a role and knew it before the first foot hit the beach. Confusion in the first 60 seconds of a raid cost lives and compromised the entire operation. The approach timing was calculated precisely. Dawn raids were the standard because they combined the cover of darkness during approach with enough light for effective movement once ashore. The crossing and approach had to be timed so that arrival coincided with the specific pre-dawn window, when darkness still covered the water, but first light was close enough for the raid itself. Too early meant operating in complete darkness with all the coordination problems that created. Too late meant being visible on the water before landing. Silence protocols were established and enforced during the approach. Sound carries extraordinarily well over water. A longship with 30 men talking at normal volume could be heard from shore before it was visible. The final approach was conducted in complete silence. No voices, oar strokes managed to minimize splash, equipment secured so nothing rattled. Breaking silence during approach was a serious breach that endangered everyone. Leaders made this clear beforehand in terms that left no ambiguity. Abort conditions were established. What circumstances would cause the raid to be called off? A larger defensive force than expected. Weather change that threatened the return crossing. Information suggesting the primary target had been moved or emptied. Good leaders established these conditions clearly before departure so that the decision to abort could be made without the psychological pressure of seeming cowardly in front of the group. An aborted raid was a loss of time. A failed raid with heavy casualties was potentially the end of a community's fighting capacity for a generation. Signal systems for the raid itself were agreed and rehearsed. how the leader communicated changes to the plan once ashore. What signal meant fall back to the ship? What signal meant the primary objective was secured? In the chaos and noise of a raid, verbal communication was often impossible. Pre-agreed signals were the only reliable command system. The final briefing was short. Everything had already been said. The last words before departure covered only changes from what had already been agreed, confirmation of timing, and the signal to move. Stage 7. In the last moments before boarding, something happened that had nothing to do with tactics or weapons or logistics. And it mattered as much as any of the practical preparation. Viking raiding parties were not anonymous military units. They were communities, men who had grown up together, trained together, and in many cases were related by blood. The relationships in that group were the deepest social bonds in their world. And those bonds were explicitly activated in the final moments before a raid. Oaths were renewed. The commitment to fight for the man beside you, not for abstract concepts or distant leaders, but for the specific person standing next to you, was stated aloud. This was not ceremony for its own sake. It was the activation of the social contract that made coordinated fighting under extreme stress possible. A man who might hesitate to take a risk for himself would not hesitate to take the same risk to protect someone he had sworn to protect in front of witnesses. Reputation was invoked. Previous raids were recalled. Specific acts of courage by men in the group were named. This was not flattery. It was psychological priming. A warrior who had been reminded of his own past courage 20 minutes before combat was more likely to access that capacity when it was needed than one who had spent the night in silence. The collective identity of the group was reinforced. This crew, this ship, these men. Viking raiders identified intensely with their specific raiding party as a unit distinct from other groups. That identity was the source of the coordination and mutual support that made them effective beyond their individual capabilities. Reinforcing it immediately before departure made that coordination available in the moments when it was hardest to maintain. And then, they boarded. In silence, in the dark, having done everything that could be done. What made Viking raids so consistently devastating over 2 centuries of European history was not that Vikings were physically superior fighters. They weren't. It was not that their weapons were better. They weren't, in most cases. It was that by the time a Viking raiding party stepped off a longship onto a foreign beach, they had already done everything that preparation could do. Every variable that could be controlled had been controlled. Every man knew his role. Every weapon worked. The ship was ready. The bodies were ready. The minds were ready. The target had no idea they were coming, and had done none of this. That asymmetry, preparation against unpreparedness, is what the sagas recorded as Viking ferocity. It wasn't ferocity, it was professionalism. If you want to keep learning about how Vikings lived, fought, and built one of the most remarkable civilizations in human history, subscribe to the channel. There is a lot more coming. Until then.